Good evening, everyone. We see that you're beginning to join us for tonight's Equity Network presentation, an important topic and an important time in our nation, particularly as our unemployment numbers sadly have reached 45 million people in the United States now who are unemployed as we still continue to face the COVID-19 pandemic and economic fallback from that. But tonight, for the Equity Network, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to communicate for your career path and really learning some terrific tips and tools from a real expert in the field who runs an executive search and consulting business. But first, let me turn it over to my colleague, Nakia, who can tell you a little bit more about the Equity Network and some of the logistics for tonight.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Nancy, for doing this session with us today. And good evening, everyone. I'm Nakia, the Engagement Associate here at AAUW, and welcome to another Equity Network webinar. If this is your first Equity Network webinar with us, welcome. I appreciate you joining us, and I hope by the end of the session, you're feeling empowered and better equipped to go after the career you want, even as we continue to navigate this really precarious time. We want these sessions to be based on topics that empower you personally and professionally. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for a webinar, just send me an email at equity@aauw.org. Or just respond to the brief survey I'll be sending out to all attendees afterwards. So just want to let you all know that tonight's session is being recorded and will be available on the website next week. Just know that you can revisit any session at any time by going to the Equity Network page of our website, and that website is aauw.org. You'll also find updates and information on all of our upcoming programs, so be sure to check those out as well. As some of you are already familiar with how we use the chat and Q&A boxes, but if this is your first webinar, we want you to use the chat box for all of your technical questions. If you can't hear us, if you can't see us, if for some reason there are two of me on your screen, just let me know in the chat box and we'll do our best to help out. You can also use the chat box to interact with each other. So if you click on the three dots in the chat box, there's an option to make your messages available to everyone. So feel free to share ideas and connect because that is what we're all here for. Now the Q&A box is for the Q&A session at the very end of the program. So if you have any substantive questions for Nancy or Kim, just send in your questions at any time during the webinar and we'll try our best to get to everyone before we close out. With that, I am going to turn this back over to Kim, who will be kicking off today's program. So I hope you all enjoy.
Thanks, Nakia. And I apologize if you all are seeing me shaking my head and doing this, but I have two hungry dogs who are awaiting dinner and are very noisy. But I'm so thrilled with the participants, everybody who's joined us tonight for this important conversation, and that we have my friend, a person who's mentored me in my career, Nancy Reset, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of DRI, joining us. But I really want to reiterate a couple of the points Nakia made about why AAUW strove to start the Equity Network. And really, it was about helping working people, men, women, non-binary gendered people, come together underneath an inclusion and equity principles that we believe in and we work on every day, and really ensuring that we can not only provide resources around inclusion and equity and advocacy, but also around career development and professional development. And as we started these programs, first in person, but also online, during the pandemic, we really found, sadly, with the amount of human beings being furloughed and laid off, or folks just really wanting to spend some extra time during their shelter-in-place quarantine, of really finding some professional development skills. And we've been just delighted with the programming we've put together thus far, and really, really eagerly hope you will fill out your evaluation and tell us what other topics you're interested in the future. But a couple of the topics that keep coming up is learning how to better navigate and network in an e-environment when you cannot be in person with human beings, how to make sure your resume and your cover letter and your correspondence is getting noticed. And so tonight I'm delighted to have my friend Nancy Reset with us. As I said, from DRI. And this firm has been around for a long time, very well known. Actually, Nancy is not only a friend, I've also served as a client of hers in two different institutions over these many years. So Nancy knows that every person can have a fundamental impact on the world. And why she believes that is really important, because she's got a background in nonprofit management, in strategy, and in problem solving, and in communications. And she's done that really to make sure nonprofits can grow and can be sustainable. Because we know that the private sector is important, the public sector is important, certainly, but that nonprofit is the the third leg of that stool that really helps our entire society continue to prosper. So she actually was, for many, many years, actually much like me, in an executive role in leading national and international organizations, and then made the pivot with her partner in 2001 to form DRI, which is really focused on strategies, solutions, and executive search. So she really knows and understands the job market of what's happening in the past and what's happening now in this really uncertain time. She's worked with organizations like the YWCA, hospitals, environmental organizations like World Wildlife Fund, universities, think tanks, and so much more. And really is not just helping you to find the right talent and helping you potentially find your next job, but really doing it in a strategic partnership way. And so I know you're going to take a lot of value out of what Nancy will share with you tonight, but we thought we'd kick it off just with a couple of questions. So Nancy, first and foremost, thank you for joining us and for helping to kind of share some of your expertise with our audience tonight. But what I thought we could do is just kind of dive in with a couple of questions. And then you all are lucky enough that Nancy has got a few PowerPoint slides here to share with you on some ideas as well. And then we'll open up that Q&A box to see what questions you all have or comments, so we can have a real conversation at the end of the presentation. But Nancy, let's dive in. You and I have been in the workforce for some time. And while this particular time we're facing is unlike anything we've ever seen before, certainly, the unemployment numbers are more like 95 years ago, not within our lifetime or our working time here. But I want to know from you, because you and I have seen some things, the tax changes in the 80s, the 9/11, the 2008-2009 financial crisis. How does this time, particularly in your work at DRI and with your colleagues in search, does this compare, contrast? Is it similar, or is it just really, really different?
So I think it's always hard to compare and contrast. But first, I do want to say thank you. That was a lovely introduction, and thank you for having me. And I could talk about these topics all day long. So, but I do want to start by saying I think it's a little difficult to compare and contrast, right? I joked when this first started with some folks that I said, here's the reality of life, right? I graduated from college in the early 80s when college graduates couldn't get jobs. If you look at the statistics, I actually graduated that year, that college graduates couldn't get jobs. And then I started this business in 2001, the Friday before September 11th, and we had to figure out how to build a business after that happened. And then we lived through the 2008 recession. What's different is, and everybody keeps saying this is the most people, what people don't also understand is that the 2008 recession wasn't just 2008, 2009, right? The 2008 recession, when they looked at it holistically, statistically, let's just mention this, it's still less people, but over a period of time, it generated 37 million, a little over 37 million unemployment claims. So now we're above that. What's different now is that it was really fast. Right? So it's been a really fast hit. And so that really fast hit is now rippling to other parts of the economy. So that really fast hit was, those places we couldn't go to anymore that were all sad. We talked about getting our nails done, or not being able to go out to eat, or not being, so those were hit just right away. And small businesses in America make up so much of our employment. And they're the ones that are getting hit the worst this time around. That has not been the case in the past. But because they're all being hit now, all of those big businesses are faced with, well, these people aren't buying my stuff anymore, right? So retail is fundamentally changing. And so even though you lose the retail people, you also lose, right, the executive level at the top. Right. And when all of that happens, our sector, my sector, the not-for-profit sector, shuts down because they say, oh, no one's going to give me any money.
Yeah.
And so we've had an awful lot of shutdown of people just saying, no, right? Can't hire, can't do this. And that's what feels different to me.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, one thing just to make sure and reiterate, we've said this on a couple of other webinars, unlike the 2008, 2009, actually women are disproportionately affected much more. One, because women make up the majority of healthcare workers, women make up the majority of low wage work and minimum wage work, and women make up the majority of part-time work. So we're on the front lines here, but we're also facing an uncertain economic future in this as well. So that's really tough. You mentioned retail. So we're coming up on 4 months of quarantine and working from home and during the COVID-19 pandemic. What sort of trends are you and your colleagues seeing both at DRI and maybe in other search circles that I'm sure you're talking with colleagues? Are there certain sectors that you're seeing are hiring more, less? And what are you seeing that's out there? I mean, I can tell you as someone who has hired, we've hired 5 new staff during this pandemic and onboarded them virtually, which is pretty amazing. And they've been off to the races and doing really well. But what sort of levels are you seeing? If you are seeing certain areas still hiring, maybe is it at the executive level? Is it mid-level? Is it entry level? And anything you can add, because we might even have some folks who are part of the class of 2020 on tonight's webinar as well.
As you look at that. So I think I want to first look at a couple of sectors that we're seeing a shift, right? Because it's been 4 months. And you mentioned healthcare. So in the beginning, healthcare lost a bunch of jobs, right? Because the hospitals just pivoted to only dealing with COVID, and there was nobody going to the dentist or the general practice or the whatever. So those actually are starting to come back. So those people are coming back. They may not be hiring as many people. Some people may have shifted and said, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. So there are jobs. I was talking to one firm that does healthcare, and they pivoted during COVID because everybody was looking for travel nurses. So if you're out there and ever wanted to be a nurse, this is a great time to be a nurse if you're okay with that, because that never went away. And actually salaries have gone up, he said, in the nursing sector. Where on the other hand, we work with physician's assistants, and they, believe it or not, even though we thought they would be so high in demand, lost their jobs. So it's been a little bit of a shift when it relates to that. So it's just something to think of, but healthcare is coming back. Tech jobs are at all levels. So we see tech jobs still being and never really stopped, both at the entry and the beginning level, at the mid-level, and at the senior level, depending on what's available. They've shifted. They're restructuring a little bit, but everybody, I have a personal story related to that. My brother's been in tech for his entire life, and he serves actually government, right? So he does helps government systems and stuff like that, and he's worked for the same consulting firm his entire career. They called him and said he was going to be laid off at the end of May, I think, or at the end of April is what it was. And then, so he put a thing out to his network and said, okay, I'm being laid off at the end of April because these contracts have shifted and we're not doing this anymore. And he never actually didn't work, right? Somebody else in the company in a different sector called him and said, I need you. So, and he had, we just kept on going. So it's just so they're just pivoting. So tech jobs, banks. So if you want to be in mergers and acquisitions, both on a lawyer side and a banking side, now's the time to enter. Those jobs are hot. There's a lot of them out there, entry level to the other, but you have to have some experience. So it's an interesting. So I would say that's more of a mid-level thing. And in terms of looking at all of that to be able to that. In our sector, I do want to talk about it. So in our sector, I am only seeing senior level jobs.
Yeah.
I am not seeing, so if an executive director is missing, they're still looking because boards are not going to run the organization themselves. If they've lost their head fundraiser, they're still looking because they feel like they really need that. If they've lost, someone senior enough that's going to drive or lead, I'm still seeing those. The mid-level jobs, there are not as many of them. Although if you're in tech and you want to help the nonprofit sector, if you're in those places, there are mid-level, and jobs out there. The other thing that is unfortunate that and I had a long conversation with a not-for-profit recently about this, is that, they've kind of like, what are we going to do with our interns? So they ended it.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, you need to go back. Now, some people, they've gone back and figured out how they could use their intern on a remote basis, or give them other things to do, which in a way I think is probably better for the interns, right? Because they're not fetching coffee and stuff. They're actually doing real work. So they are going back. So it depends on what you're doing. The other shift we've seen, and I'm going to throw this out there, right, is that it was a tight market. So I feel like I need to say this. So going into this, it was a really tight market. It was fabulous for us search firms, although it was hard for us too, right? Because people weren't looking for jobs, and it was a really tight market. So now there are more people available. That doesn't mean that the people that are available are right for the job, but it's still going to up the competition. So, for a job where we might have only seen, I'll use this one because I know the numbers. My daughter is looking to hire an entry-level person she's a scientist, and she's looking to hire an entry-level scientist. They have certain requirements for this particular job. And she told me yesterday she got 450 applications for that one job.
Yeah, I believe it. And so you get through that. So that really aligns with my last question before we turn over to your presentation. And that is, how many of the folks on tonight's webinar may be still working for their current employer, or an internship right now, but they're looking for future work. And all of them might be thinking, we're all thinking about our careers and the like. So what's the number one thing you'd recommend to somebody in this time, knowing that it was already a slim market and now the ratios have even gotten bigger? If you're looking for a new position right now, what's the number one trait you should be thinking about, or thing you should be thinking about? Is it just an abundance of patience? Is it casting a lot of lines into the lake? What's your number one recommendation there?
You're going to laugh at me. My number one recommendation to everybody is to be positive.
Yeah.
People who bring a certain sense of anxiety, negativity, worry, all of that is not what organizations want. And if you're positive about it, and you're positive about what you're looking for, and you're positive about that you can do it and you can get it, I firmly believe it will come to you.
Yeah.
And the right thing will come to you.
No, that's a great answer, Nancy, and food for thought for all of us about taking a deep breath, smiling, and thinking about how we can all move forward. I'm going to turn it now to Nancy to go ahead and go through her slides. Just as a reminder, if you've got an issue with technology, use the chat box. If you want to ask a question anywhere within the presentation here for Nancy, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll stop by about 5:40 p.m., 5:45 p.m. Eastern time, and allow you some chance so we can kind of go through some of those questions and answers. And I'll also remind you, and I know she'll get to this too, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn as well. It's another way just to keep that connectivity going as well. And so I'll turn it now over to Nancy. Nancy, thanks again so much for being with us.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to quickly go through this to leave enough time for the questions. I've got a bunch of different things in here that I want to talk about with you. We did say it was landing a job and communicating for your career. So I'm going to start with finding your next job. And this is whether you are already in a job and just want to do something, or whether you're just looking for a job, right? And so what I always tell people to start out with and to begin with is to dream a little. Right? What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? What would make you happy? What would leave you fulfilled? Do that dreaming on your own part, because I think that makes a big difference as you go to approach and define your ideal job. Do you really know what that is? And if you're defining your ideal job, is it an ideal job as you perceive it to be an ideal job? Do you think this is your ideal job? Or do you really know what the job is and you know it's your ideal job? I have a lot of people who come to me and say, I want to work in the not-for-profit sector, or I want to be, a CEO. And I say, so do you know what being a CEO really means? And what is really encompassed with that? And what it's like to report to 26 board members? So there are just things you need to do and do your homework while you're doing that. But define your ideal job before you start looking for it. And then do an honest self-assessment of yourself. And I mean honest, right? It's not all of those things. It's really an honest self-assessment of what am I really good at? Do I know what I'm really good at? Do I know what I bring to the table for an organization, right? Not just what I want, but what do I bring for an organization? And then do you know what you're not good at? Because I ask that question a lot in interviews, and a lot of people look at me and say, oh, well, because they're expecting a different kind of question. They're not expecting, oh, what are you not good at? They're expecting, what challenges do you have or whatever. Really know what you're not good at, because no one's perfect. And be honest about that. How you phrase it, that's a different story, but know what it is. Kim said, do you just throw things out there? No. First of all, don't just apply to ads. If you're really looking for your ideal job and defining your ideal job and want to do that, then you need to do your homework on where is that job? What sector, what company, what place? Don't just apply. You can apply to ads, but don't just apply to ads, right? Who do you know? There is 6 degrees of separation in this world. And one person can lead to the next person, can lead to the next person. And if you've been on these webinars before, you did the one on networking, it's really, really important. And do your company research. I have had people say, oh, I love this company, I love this job, I'm going to go do it, I'm going to do it. And then they forget all about doing some underground research, right? What's the culture like? What's the leadership like? What have they done for equity? What have they done, and who are they as a company? And do your research before you apply, even as you're doing that. And then don't apply to everything. People who are out of work really feel like they need to apply to everything. But the reality of the situation is most of the time, if you're applying to something for which you absolutely don't fit, it's just going in the trash anyway. Nobody's looking at it. They're not going to talk to you. You don't have the qualifications they need. It's not going to matter. So don't. Be really mindful about what you're applying to and really apply to those jobs where you might stand a chance and do it. And then be picky. You'll be happier that you were. One of the things you don't want to do is end up in a job that you absolutely hate and you're gone again in 3 months, right? You're trying to find the right job for you. And second, have confidence in yourself and in your ability, and make sure you can demonstrate that confidence without being cocky. It's really important. I did want to take a half a second to talk about career transitions. A lot of people in today's environment are saying, okay, now's the time, right? My sector's blown up. I can't, it's going out of business. I've been laid off. Or I've been working for the telephone company, I'm making this up, for 100 years, and I really just now want to do something more meaningful with my life, so I want to change to something else. So how do you make that career transition, and what do you do? So the first thing I like to talk about is Plan A versus Plan B jobs. So your Plan A job is the job that you ideally want, that you defined earlier, that takes you into that career transition, into the sector where you want to go, and that's the job that you really want. And then you have to think about, how do you get that job? You may not have all the right skill sets for that sector. You may not have the background or the history. And right now in a pandemic, right, there may be a lot more people competing for that job. So you really have to think about it. I frequently get the question of, well, I just want to go into the not-for-profit sector. And I always ask, do you know what that really means? What does not-for-profit sector mean to you? And what do you think that job is going to do for you? And why should somebody hire you? I would then say your Plan B job is to look at the sector, look at the organizations in that sector and the kinds of jobs you want, but then you know that you could really do it. So let's say you were working in the tech sector and you were doing a lot of great things, working for a consulting company, but now you want to go inside of an organization. So but you're not sure you want to be doing the same thing you were doing in the consulting company inside of an organization. Well, maybe you have to. Maybe you have to do the same thing inside of an organization that you were doing over here. And so maybe that makes a difference. So just think about that. That's your Plan B job. If you just want a totally new industry, you need to learn about the industry. And it's okay. You can make that shift. I think right now during the pandemic, I'm hearing about more and more people making that shift and more organizations being willing to accept those people. But you need to understand what you bring to the table. When it's tough, do you do part-time? Do you do freelance work? What does that matter? I think that's up to you. And you know what? It's okay. Right now, 6 months ago, I would have said, don't go do a part-time job if you're really looking for a full-time job. Or I might have said, freelance is great, but it should be get yourself into a contract and what happens if you get a whatever. I think people are a lot more accepting right now. Part-time can mean benefits. It can mean a lot of other things. So think about that. Whereas freelance, you're generally on a 1099. You are paying your own taxes. You have to keep track of that stuff. So just be mindful of that when you're doing it, because some people are not. And you have to decide, right? No one can decide that for you, but think about what that means to you. And then know, in terms of your career transition, how to position yourself. I talked a little bit about that before, so I won't go into it a lot, but how do you position yourself to be the right person in that organization for that job, and what does that mean? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing I really think you need to do is understand job titles. Particularly in the not-for-profit sector, there are no consistent job titles. So you need to figure out what those job titles mean and do your homework around some of them. I know organizations that hire, let's say, we'll talk about fundraising, that hire development directors that are really more like executive assistants. So there's not a lot of consistency, so understand what you're applying for. So now let's go from career transitions and what do you do to that to what makes a standout resume. So I'm going to talk about all of these things just a little bit through as we go through that. I have this little cartoon here because it's true, right? You want your resume to be the one that they remember, but remember they're getting a lot of resumes. So what do you need to think about and how do you do that? So these are things that matter, right? Formatting, accomplishments, tailored to the position, the right keywords. We'll talk about all of these in a second with a resume, soft skills, and honest. I'm going to come back to soft skills now real quick because I didn't write them down. But more and more, people always say that the soft skills are important. And then I get questions around what are soft skills. And they're all of those things that you bring to the table for the organization that helps them see you in their culture, right? So are you a team player? Are you, although everybody says this, so don't overuse it, but are you that people person? Are you a motivator? What are you related to all of those things in terms of your personality? So who is the person that you bring to the table is really important. So let's talk about this resume. So this is not a real one, but it's one that we use to do a little bit of an example. See how it's pretty simple and the formatting is pretty simple. The reason we believe that this is the best way is because people spend, and hiring managers in particular, and HR departments spend an average of 1.5 minutes scanning a resume before they make a decision, believe it or not. If they see something that attracts them or gets their eye, then they'll take it further and read it more deeply. But it's a quick scan over what that is. And so I'm going to go through some of these things. So you'll notice up here that we put LinkedIn here. Do not put LinkedIn there if your LinkedIn is crap. I'll be really honest with you. Make sure you look at what your LinkedIn is. I also put this here because in terms of this format, you'll see there's no picture. If you have a picture anywhere, have it on your LinkedIn. I don't believe in pictures on resume. I think they can drive unconscious bias. I think they can do a whole lot of things that are not helpful or good for anybody. So don't use a picture unless it's specifically requested, and sometimes it's requested in the application. But if it's not, there's no reason to put a picture anyway, and it rarely goes over well. But you should probably have a very professional picture on LinkedIn. And if it's not professional, don't put it on LinkedIn. That belongs somewhere in Facebook in your friends only land, not on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is someplace that everybody goes to. So even if it's not on your resume, a hiring manager is going to look at your resume, then they're going to check and see what's on your LinkedIn. And then they're going to scan for other things like your Facebook and your Twitter and whatever else you've said. So keep that in mind. We've done these. It's not working right here. I'm going to have to change it. Give me a second. Can I go here? Yeah. We've done these as we've listed them as brand strengths and experience. Some people list this first one as whatever that might be in terms of your objective or what that is. What I like to say to that is that's great, that's fine, I don't object to that. What I want everybody to remember is while this resume is about you, it's not about you. It's about who you're applying to and what are they looking for and who are you related to what they're looking for. Always keep in mind who your audience is. We then go to strengths. So I like people to just put out these words. The reason I say that is because a lot of organizations, for-profit companies especially, large or not-for-profits, they use a keyword check. So it goes through an automatic program. They look for keywords related to the job description of what they're looking for, and your resume will pop out as one to get further scrutiny if the keywords stand out. If they don't, it may not, depending on how many they get. So I think just show what your strengths are up here. There's no harm in that. Here, highlight the organization you're working for, especially if there's a connection. Highlight your date over here. Everybody wants, and everybody says, I'm going to do a functional resume, and a lot of resume writers say that's the way to go. And trust me, it's not. They want what your experience is, and they want your chronological resume. We also, as you notice, have highlighted stuff that goes back throughout this. That goes back to what are they looking for? Managed a team of 5 and accomplished over $25 million. You want or managed about agreements over $25 million. So what that means is they've managed a $25 million budget, right? And had a team of 5. These are things that are important in terms of their job description, but then what did they accomplish is something I didn't highlight that. But I also want to, sorry, I went backwards too fast, but I also want what did they accomplish? Accomplishments more than job description is particularly important in a resume as you look at that. So then I'll go to our next resume or our next page. So if you go down to this page, the thing I just want to point out is awards and service. And some people like to give me 10 pages of awards and service. Don't do it, right? Only put the awards and service and those things that you think might stand out for the organization or is particularly gives you experience in other things. Show that you have volunteered in something that makes a difference. Those things matter, but not to the extent that the other things matter. The other things probably matter more in terms of your accomplishments, and just remember that. In terms of this, I also wanted to point out if you're working on a thesis, if you have an advanced degree, if you have a PhD or a master's or something like that, your thesis title should be in there. People ask for it and they look for it and they want to know what it is. You probably already know that, but I would recommend that it's in there. I would also recommend that if you put languages, make sure you really can speak them, or to say that you are a beginner in something. Do not put them down if you do not know them. Because she doesn't care if I talk about her, I will let you know that my daughter interviewed for a job where she said she had intermediate proficiency in Spanish, and she ended up with one of her interviewers interviewed her in Spanish. She got away with her answers because she had already said she wasn't fluent. So just keep in mind as you look back that they may interview you in that language if you put it on your resume. So I do want to talk to you about what to avoid. I said picture already. Buzzwords, like things that people are saying are really important or fancy, avoid those these days. Please don't be boring. You would imagine resumes that go on and on and on and are dull and there's too much language and too much words and nobody's going to read them. I say resume language because there is language out there that everybody wants to use, and so forget it. Typos seem self-explanatory, except that you'd be surprised at the number of resumes that we get, even at the most senior level, that has a typo in it, and it eliminates you automatically, especially when there's a lot. I say cookie cutter applications in today's day and age, do not be sending the same resume to everybody, because it'll become clear to the people that are reading it that it's not tailored to them. It's easy, right? We talked about some of this other stuff. Also, I put excessive salesmanship. That goes back to thinking about the fact that it is about you, but it isn't about you. It's about the person. It's about your audience. It's communicating to that audience. And then watch out for inconsistencies, please. If you tell me one thing at the top and something else at the bottom, then it's gone, and it happens, believe it or not. And I'm going to talk about the cover letter, and I know I'm talking fast, and so as Kim said, you can have this later. What makes a standout cover letter? So know the reason for a cover letter and why you're writing one. I'm an executive recruiter, right? And so everybody always wants to send me a cover letter, and I always tell them if I call them and ask them to apply for a job, unless I ask them for a cover letter, I don't need one, right? Just because I don't need it. I've already done my homework on you, so don't go to that time and effort of writing me one, because no one's going to see it. So you just need to think about what the reason is for writing a cover letter. Have they asked for a cover letter? Who is it and what you're doing? When you're doing a cover letter and you're applying for an application, make sure it's tailored to the position. Make sure it's proud but not boasting. Once again, use keywords. Address any concerns. So if you've had a lot of quick job pops, put that in your letter. Say why, because that's the first question out of every organization's mouth. Like, why are they leaving their job? Or why are the last 3 jobs only been for a year? People want to know. We think that's changed in today's society, but I'm telling you, I have people still ask me those questions. Be able to demonstrate passion and excitement, and don't regurgitate your resume. That is not what anybody wants to see. So this was actually based on a cover letter that actually helped somebody get a job that I wasn't sure about in some instances, right? So if you look at the things that matter, this is Dear Search Committee. We just put Search Committee here. Put Dear whoever. Try to find out. If you don't know who is doing the hiring, say Dear Hiring Manager. Don't put to whom it may have concern. It looks like you haven't even tried. So if you can find someone to send it to, try that. And if you can't, address it in the way they tell you to. And if they don't, see if you can say Dear whoever, hiring manager, or whatever that means. I would also make sure that up front you say that you're looking for this, like what job is. This next section is a detailed description of a couple of achievements that demonstrate your brand, your passion, your connection. Not a regurgitation, just a couple of things that connect to the organization's mission. And that's just not in not-for-profit. That is also in other fields. I talked to a lot of different people related to that, and that is not that different when it comes to that. The next thing I would say to you is that your cover letter should do this, right? You should say, I would be thrilled to do this, and then look at this. It's easy. These address the job descriptions. I have a passion for nature and strong written oral communication skills. I have experience in securing funds of research, and here's how much I've done. I have a demonstrated record of conducting field research in international sections. All of those things were in the job description. So highlight that and then tell them what you did. Don't make it too long. Don't address everything. Just address a few of the things that it gets somebody's attention. And then the next thing I would say is this, make sure that it's language like this, right? A demonstrated record, conducting it in. So be firm, but not over. The last piece of this piece right here is the piece I got a letter where I got a resume where I looked at a resume recently and said this person is not what it was for an executive director position. And I said this person is not really what they're looking for, is not coming from the right sector. I'm not sure we want to go there. But the resume was interesting enough that I read the cover letter. In her cover letter, she was able to give me a personal story as to why she wanted this job, enough so that I interviewed her. That's what got her the interview. So think about that. You have to think about what's going to get you in the door to get the interview. That's what all of this paper is about. And it wasn't too long. I didn't get bored. I wasn't, it was just enough to have me intrigued so that I moved on to the next thing. So why do you want this job? It comes right back to that. And why should they want you is what those two things are. I'm going to do these next pieces relatively quickly. So should you follow up? Of course, unless they say not to. So some applications do say do not contact. So if it does say do not contact, don't contact them. I think that's a mistake people made. Like if you've given an instruction, follow the instruction. I would also say that in today's world, a follow-up email to the hiring manager is perfectly acceptable after you've sent your resume. If you have a personal contact, then send the application you sent in to that personal contact affiliated with the company. That frequently will get you through, so remember that. All you should be doing at this time after you send it in is that just saying, I'd like to confirm that you received my application and demonstrate some enthusiasm. But don't do it. Give it 5 to 10 days before you do that. Next is interview, and this is not an interviewing prep session, so I'm going to give you some really quick stuff for people to think about, and that is do your homework, right? In today's COVID and pandemic, everybody's interviewing first via video. Make sure you know what your background is. You'd be surprised the number of people who are not aware of their background or aware of what people look at in their background. So make sure you know what your background is and make sure that you're a professional. Dress professionally and all over because you'll feel better. Like we've had a lot of jokes right now just about being dressed professionally on top. This is an interview. Dress for it. Put a suit on. Do something. But it is an interview. If it's an organization you've done your research and they go to work in jeans and t-shirts every day, okay, so dress like them. That's okay. But be the professional person you are. Make sure you can answer common questions. So a lot of people just don't think about what those common questions will be. And be concise but informative. Listen to, I can't read you all today because I can't see you, but listen to and read your audience. You should be able to tell if the person across from you is getting bored or is not really listening to you or is looking elsewhere. So make sure that you do that and always have questions and try to make them smart questions. No, I have never seen anyone get a job who hasn't asked questions after it, ever. So even if you don't have any, figure out what some might be. Always have questions. And always send a thank you afterwards. And you'd be surprised. I am always surprised that I have to say this to folks, but you'd be surprised at the number of people who don't. It's a sheer sign to anybody. It's a sign that you just don't really want the job. And I would say that people are feeling in the age of the pandemic and the age of people working from home and the age of people having to wear masks if they have to go to work, outside of the home, those things, that communication and collaboration skills are more important than ever. So make sure you're good at them. Really think about what those are. I do have some questions in here. We don't have to go through all of them, but always tailor your questions about the organization and the position, right? And it is okay to ask, how are you supporting your newly remote workers? Will I have the option to work remotely long term? Will this affect career and future opportunities if I do work remotely long term? It's okay to ask about their business plan related to COVID and what safety measures they have in place. I only put these up here because some people are afraid to ask those questions because they're really looking for a job. It's okay to ask those questions, and I think businesses expect them today and are a little surprised when people don't ask them. This does depend on what kind of job you're looking for, what industry, and who they are. So keep that in mind as well, that it varies per thing. So that is all I have today. I was trying to look, Kim, I did it, I think.
Great. You did great.
Do it on time. So that's where we are. So I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Thanks, Nancy. I've got two for you. One is, as we're looking at our resume, I know, it's demonstrated, as you gave that one example of demonstrated experience. I've always been a big believer in quantitative and qualitative there. So if you've got demonstrated, is it by a percentage? Is it by number of research things done? Is it, is it dollars, expenses saved? Is it 5 projects completed, whatever?
Yeah.
Do you still agree with that on keeping wherever you can, adding in numbers?
Always.
Good.
Right? So that's what I meant when I talk about be able to show what you've done, not what your job description was, right?
Yeah.
What have you accomplished? And if you have numbers, put them in. And if you're afraid your numbers don't look great, I'm going to say this out loud, but then use percentages, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, figure out, numbers can be fudged. I hate to say that, but put them on there appropriately and be honest, but use them so that they attract and you can explain later.
And they story tell a bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question in the chat, and not in the Q&A, which we'll get over to, but one question, just so everybody knows, was about what is a good LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the people that you follow. Look at your own mentors and like people you really admire, either in your industry or others, and look at how they've laid it out. You're going to find a lot of action verbs. You're going to find a lot of keywords about abilities, strategies, etc. And you can really mirror that. You can also look at the job descriptions of the types of jobs you're looking for some of those keywords. And if you feel you emulate them, and I think to Nancy's point, be honest about it. If you emulate those, start to reorganize your LinkedIn profile. And in this time when we're all working in our UGG slippers, from home right now, it's a good time, if you do one thing for your professional development, is making sure that LinkedIn profile looks good now is really important. So let's
really important. The other thing I want to add, can I add one thing to that, Kim? So the other thing I want to add to that is that also within your LinkedIn profile, even if you're just starting out in your career, if you can have somebody do a recommendation for you of some way, a professional recommendation, not your best friend saying you were a great person to party with in college, but a professional recommendation for you.
Right.
Employers do look at those. So I would.
Yeah. And I think, one other thing that you brought up that I thought was really interesting in your presentation is if they say don't follow up, just don't contact us, we'll contact you. One other thing that can be helpful is if you look at your own contacts in, your contacts that you have, your network, as well as on LinkedIn, you might know somebody who works there and you might inquire with them. And that's not inquiring with the hiring manager. That's
exactly
when you get a little sense of organizational fit that way too. Yeah. So here's a few questions we've got here. Let's see. Let me try see if I can find a couple of good. So one question was, what's the ideal length on a resume? And you and I have seen a lot of them. I've seen the less than 1 page. I've seen the 15 page with 20 pages of attachments. Right. So what does it look like for you? You gave some good structure to that, but what is an ideal length for folks?
So I think it depends on your industry. Okay, I am going to say that, right? If you're in academia, it's very different than if you are out in the rest of the world, right? So those 15-page resumes with all of the publications and all of that, if you don't have publications or whatever, that's important in academia. After that, what I say to folks is, where are you in your career, right? A 1-page resume is really only good for someone who's entry level.
Yeah.
Right? After entry level, I'm hoping you have done some stuff. Right? And then anywhere from 2 to 3 pages is okay. And if you have to go to 4, if you're like at the very top C-suite, that's okay too. Right? So, but anything past that, it's too much. In my general opinion. So ideally, people say, oh, give me 2 pages. But most people at a senior level, 2 pages is not enough. And if you want to keep your formatting simple, and if you want to change careers, right? If you're like transitioning, I talked to somebody yesterday who's transitioning from military to not-for-profit. So if you're transitioning, like he's got his military career and then he had his, he's got a little bit of not-for-profit and he wants to keep on going, but he couldn't do that. And, that's 4 pages. So I think you just need to think about what it is, but 2 to 3 pages is the best.
So there's also a question there on cover letters that a lot of them, a lot of organizations will discard, throw away resumes because a person has not completed a cover letter, even if they didn't ask for it. So the question here is when to submit and when not to submit a cover letter. My feeling is always include a cover note at the very least, and a follow-up note, as you said, 5 to 10 days later. What's your take on cover letters?
Yeah, so I would say if you're just applying blindly to an ad or something, include a cover letter, even if they didn't ask for it. right? Because the worst that thing that happens is they just discard it too. But at least with a cover letter might give you an ability to talk about things in it differently than you do in your resume. So, and to tell a little story, just don't make it too long. Don't make it more than one page. Like, tell them why you want the job and move on. But I think you're better off including one than not including one if you're applying blindly. If you're not applying blindly, you can always ask.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair enough. So there's a really good question here on gender because you said, be mindful of where you stand a chance in terms of the job title. We do, so for everybody on here, that we do some salary negotiation programs through our Work Smart Online, so you can get a sense of titles and what those bands are for where they are and the levels of experience. So you can find a lot of that information in our webinar on Work Smart Online, but also by visiting salary.com and some other good websites to help you gauge that. But, this is a real gender question, and you and I have seen this a lot of times in our life, and there's a lot of research that shows that men can look at a job description and see that they can do 65, 70% of it and say, I'll figure out the rest of it on the job. But a lot of women maybe will say, ooh, I don't meet 100%, so should I go for it or not? So the question here is, how can women be mindful and also go forward and apply like men who sometimes raise their hands when they may not have all the job qualifications?
Yeah, I don't think I was telling them to not apply if they don't have all the job. Nobody has 100% of anything. Right. And I think I was trying to get people to say, yeah, be confident in yourself and who you are and what you can do. I was the first woman in one particular job, Kim, and I think you know that story. And it was awful. Right. It was, they were not nice people. Today, they would have all been, I would have been able to do a whole lot of other things that I couldn't do back then. But I was confident that I could do the job, and I did do the job, and I did move forward. So I think you need to be confident that you can do the job. And that's what I meant by be mindful of who you are. If you really believe you have 60 to 70% of that job and you know that you can do that job, then apply for that job, right? I don't care what gender you are. I don't even care if you're purple. Apply for that job. Yeah. So, and go for it, right? Demonstrate your confidence. Look at that, know what you're good at. The time that you should take a step back and take a deep breath is if you've never done anything in that job description, right? And then, is that job really for you?
Yeah, or are you just pressing send to say that you've applied for some work?
That you've applied. Yeah.
Good point. So this one's a really good question. And, I think cultural fit, particularly as we're looking at people entering the workforce for the first time or maybe are taking a second step into a second or third job now, really want to make sure that they're meeting up and it's not just a mission statement and values, which everybody has a well-written employee handbook, but how do you get to know about the culture of an organization if you don't have a connection there? So any advice on that?
So the internet is a wonderful thing, right? So don't always believe everything you read, because that is not always true either, right? There is always one disgruntled employee who's going to say something awful that may not be true at all. But you can look for articles that may have been written on the company or the organization. You can look for what do they do in their social media? What do they put out there to the world for the world to see? You can look for you can read between the lines in communication, right, in terms of what happens and what that looks like. So you should do all of that homework. You should look at what does their job, can you go back how many years and what their annual reports, even for-profits do annual reports, and what their annual reports and things look like, and how many leaders have they had? Or how many VPs have they had? How much turnover has there been? Yeah. Yeah. So just look for certain things that will demonstrate, if people are running for the hills, or do they stick around a long time, or do women talk like you see women in higher level positions? That's always awesome. Do you only see, and I don't mean to be anything, but do you only see one token diversity person, or does it look like they've become an integrated organization? What is important to you?
Yeah, I think that's really good.
And then look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. So there's another question. Actually, I really like this one too. Could you offer an example of numbers or percentages to include relating to an administrative assistant position? I'll just start off by saying I've seen a lot of these where you say, I improved processes which allowed me to take on 20% more projects because I improved the processes of how we were working in these ways to support my vice presidents, which allowed me to do even more. Any other tips on that, Nancy?
Yeah. So, how can you demonstrate if you've been an administrative assistant, you want to keep moving in the administrative field, and trust me, I am a person who believes that they are extraordinarily important and couldn't exist without one. So one of the things that I always say to folks to be looking for when they're doing those is if you say that you're organized, right? So if you're an organized person, what did you organize that helped someone be organized, right? Were you an administrative assistant who helped your the person you were serving write? But did you write their blogs? Were you a blind writer? Did you write their thank you letters? Did you do those things, right? Then say I helped, or I did, or I worked with the team to create.
Yeah.
There are things you just need to think about within your job that enabled you to help the organization you were working for move forward, but also the person you were working with move forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. And, one of the things that we talk about a lot is keeping a me file so you can keep some of those accolades, because it's really hard to remember all the projects you've completed and the things you've done because you're always, hamster in the wheel, just keep on going. So really consider, even if it's just in your Outlook inbox and you've got a me folder in there where you can throw in accolades for projects you've done, whatever, so that as you're putting this together, you can remember things for the future when you are thinking about interview process. And yes, you are hearing my dogs in the background. My apologies. So this, we've got room probably for two more here, Nancy. One I really want to address, and it's so important for women in particular, is re-entering the workforce after a period of time outside. So this one is any suggestions for someone returning to work after not working for 10 years. This is something that's facing so many women who still unfortunately have more of the burden of childcare and elder care and have to go in and out of the workplace.
Absolutely. So I think first of all, figure out if you were in and out, or if you haven't been out of work or whatever, if you've been doing childcare, if you've been doing elder care, if you've been doing all of the things, what skills did you learn as you were doing those? And what sector are you going into that that would want those skills? Like, do you know what you're applying for or where you've been? Don't only focus on what you were doing pre-kids, pre-parent care, whatever, for whatever reason that you might have decided not work for the last 10 years, and God bless you if it was because you didn't have to, and I'm sorry if you have to now. But in any case, if you look at that and say, why was I doing it? Why do you then focus on what is your brand and why do you want to go to work? Like, what is your why? And then focus on that, and then focus on what is your skill set and how did you apply them over the last 10 years so that you can easily apply them when you go in someplace else. So what do you have to offer somebody? I have a friend who was a stay-at-home mom for the longest time in the entire world, and she couldn't figure out what to do with her life, and she is so amazing. I couldn't have existed without her. She is an amazing human who gave a lot to a lot of other people. She was a Meals on Wheels volunteer. She just did a lot of other things. But she is the most organized person I know. And she has organized whatever. And I finally convinced her that what she needed to do was to find a real estate agency that would help send her into other people's homes to organize them before they needed to sell the house. It's become a great little business for her.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Just think about what you have to offer and to move that out there, because someone will need it. Trust me.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing a lot more of those transitions happening because there's a better understanding of the need to change the paradigms of how we worked in the past and how we work today. And different levels of talent, different levels of experience is really key. I love this from Celia. I want some strategies for networking outside of LinkedIn. I can give you a couple right off the top of my head. We all have alma maters, right, at different levels. Go back and see who's in your network from high school, from community college, from grad school, what have you. Use those alumni associations, become a member, see how you can connect. You can do informational interviews with folks who maybe are in sectors from those alumni associations that are of interest to you. And at the time of COVID, you can volunteer, find a passion in a nonprofit sector or the like to broaden your network even more. Is there an association for your field that you could join so you can be with like-minded people and understand industries and associations better and sectors better? What other tips do you have? I think you covered a lot of them. I would say, since we're looking at it in terms of the pandemic, right, don't forget your personal networks.
So not even just your alumni and all of that, but who's in your neighborhood, right? Who are your neighbors and what are their jobs, or in your apartment building, or, whatever. You'd be surprised, the people who get out to network and chat with people. If you see something online for someone you didn't even know and you sent them a little message right now, I bet you they would send you a message back, whether it's on Facebook or wherever, just to say, they wanted to connect. And if you are getting out a little bit now, even in a mask, it can't hurt to ask, hey, how was your day?
Yeah.
Because people will talk back to you, and you'd be surprised what you may find out about somebody. So, you can network that way also.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Last one we've got here, and this kind of relates to it, is what do you recommend saying to people in your network if you're reaching out to inquire about, status, jobs, organizational fit, etc., but particularly if you haven't spoken to them in a really long time. So how to kind of redate again, if you will, and reintroduce yourself. You don't want to start off with, and I'm so sorry to bother you, but what's your advice on, right, exactly. So what's your advice on how to reignite that relationship?
Mine is really, I use time and space, right? So right now in the time of COVID, there's nothing wrong with sending a message that says, hey, this is where I'm at. Where are you at? And are you staying safe and healthy? And what are you up to? And I'm looking for a new job and I'd love to reconnect. I have had many of those. I have not said no to anybody. Now, granted, I'm in the field, but I'm like, okay, sure. What do you want to talk about? I think people are feeling like they want to reconnect with other people. So I think just being honest and putting it out there is okay. I really do. Yeah. I think people who try to gloss it over and then throw it in later, it feels not good, right? So I think you just need to think about how you phrase it, but it's okay to ask somebody you haven't talked to in a long time how they're doing.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's because, again, we talked about this in a previous session too. It's not just about personal pronoun I. It's not just what your needs are. It's really providing value and benefit on that other side too. So making it really a two-way relationship is so key in this, and it's going to help build your network for many years to come. All right, so last question, and I know what Nancy's answer is going to be, but I'm curious about this. In the age of now, is a thank you by email the best form or versus postal mail?
No, email.
Yeah.
You don't need to send something in the mail anymore. I mean, it's nice to get a note, but let's be real. Most people's handwriting is not good.
Yeah.
So, it's nice to get a personal note, and sometimes it really stands out or whatever. But I don't think even pre-COVID, if somebody asked me, I said, you're perfectly fine sending an email. You can send a personal note afterwards if you want to, but an email is faster. So the faster you get it to them, the better off you are.
Yep. The only caution I would say is, because I get a lot of those types of emails, is check your work, because people tend to think more carefully when they're handwriting a note out than they do when they're typing 65 words a minute. So really check your spelling, check your grammar, make sure it's compliment, not versus compliment, that you're using the right words and all before you press that send button.
Well, can I add one more thing? I know we're running out of time, but when it comes to that is, what people forget to do with their emails is read them out loud.
Yeah.
So read it out loud to yourself, right? Because you'll find a word is missing, or you'll say, oh, that sounds awful. Like, what am I saying here right now? Yeah. So, read your email out loud, your thank you out loud before you send it off to somebody, because that could also be like a deal killer.
Yep, I totally agree. Nakia, do you mind popping on again here for a second on video to join Nancy and me for wrap up? Great, thank you. So a couple of things to everybody who's on tonight. One, we haven't given you yet an opportunity to network with one another, and that's something that Nakia and I are planning very soon, so that it'll be likely in the coming weeks here, where you are going to be able to move into breakout rooms and get to know one another a little bit more as well. So you can even start networking within the equity network, which is really, really important. And I'd also say, even as we're looking at all of this, Nancy's given you some really terrific advice on resume writing, on clarity of communications, etc. throughout this. And it will be available on our website. the other thing that is really great is talking through with a trusted colleague or friend and having them kind of look through your words, because a lot of times, particularly for women, we tend to mute our accomplishments still. And so making sure that you're squaring your shoulders and owning your space in this is really, really important. So you're putting your best foot forward. And we're hoping that we're going to get a chance to share more information with you in future webinars. But for tonight, what I want to do is thank Nancy Reset and DRI for really joining us tonight and sharing some tools and tips from what she's seen through a long time of work and really understanding what's happening right now during this pandemic and this economy. So my friend, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And Nakia, do you want to do a wrap up on what happens after we shut this down tonight and what they'll receive in their email inboxes?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. And thank you as well, Nancy. It was a great session, really helpful for me. So I'm sure that we're able to reach a lot of folks tonight as well. So thank you again for coming. And thank you all for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar and found it helpful too. We'll continue to make space for learning and empowering each other. But just remember, we're a nonprofit, so we do need your support. And we needed to continue developing these programs for you. So when the webinar closes, our donation page will appear in your browser.
Yeah.
We will consider being a part of the Equity Network by contributing to AAUW. We appreciate whatever you're able to afford at this time. Also, stay tuned for a brief survey and information on some upcoming programs. We have some really exciting stuff planned out for you guys. And I appreciate you all joining us. So stay safe, and I hope that you'll tune in again for future webinars. So everyone have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.